I do not hope or pretend that anyone will believe the most monstrous and at the same time the most mundane story that I'm going to tell. Only a madman could hope for that, since I can't believe myself. And I'm not crazy, and this is clearly not a dream. But tomorrow I will no longer be alive, and today I have to ease my soul with repentance. My only intention is to clearly, briefly, without further ado, tell the world about some purely family events. In the end, these events brought me only horror. They exhausted me, they ruined me. And yet I will not look for clues. I have suffered fear because of them. They will seem to many more harmless than the most absurd fantasies. Then, perhaps, some intelligent person will find the simplest explanation for the ghost that killed me. Such a person, with a mind colder, more logical and, most importantly, not as impressionable as mine, will see in circumstances that I cannot talk about without awe, just a chain of natural causes and consequences. Since childhood, I have been distinguished by obedience and meekness of disposition. The tenderness of my soul manifested itself so openly that my peers even teased me about it. In particular, I loved different animals, and my parents did not prevent me from keeping pets. I spent every free moment with them and was at the top of bliss when I could feed and caress them. Over the years, this feature of my character developed, and when I grew up, few things in life could give me more pleasure. Anyone who has experienced affection for a faithful and intelligent dog, there is no need to explain to him how fervently she pays for it. In the selfless and selfless love of the beast, there is something that conquers the heart of anyone who has more than once experienced the treacherous friendship and deceptive devotion inherent in man. I got married early and, fortunately, discovered in my spouse inclinations close to me. Seeing my predilection for pets, she did not miss the opportunity to please me. We had birds, goldfish, a purebred dog, rabbits, a monkey and a cat. The cat, unusually large, beautiful and completely black, without a single spot, was distinguished by a rare intelligence. When it came to his intelligence, my wife, who's no stranger to superstition at heart, often hinted at an old folk sign, according to which all black cats were considered werewolves. Hinted, of course, not seriously, and I give this detail only because now is the time to remember it. Pluto, that was the cat's name, was my favorite, and I often played with him. I always fed him myself, and he followed me around when I was at home. He even tried to tag along with me on the street, and it took me a lot of work to get him away from it. Our friendship lasted for several years, and during this time my temper and character under the influence of the devil's temptation changed dramatically. I am burning with shame, admitting this, for the worse. Day by day I became more and more gloomy, irritable, indifferent to the feelings of others. I allowed myself to shout rudely at my wife. In the end, I even raised my hand to her. My pets, of course, also felt this change. I not only stopped paying attention to them, but even treated them badly. However, I still retained quite a reverence for Pluto and did not allow myself to offend him, as I shamelessly offended rabbits, a monkey, and even a dog when they caressed me or accidentally fell under my arm. But the disease was developing in me, and there is no disease more terrible than addiction to alcohol. And finally, even Pluto, who has already grown old and has become more capricious from this, even Pluto began to suffer from my bad temper. One night I came back heavily drunk after visiting one of my favorite zucchini, and then it occurred to me that the cat was avoiding me. I caught him, frightened by my rudeness. He did not bite me hard, but still bit my hand until it bled. The demon of rage immediately possessed me. I was no longer in control of myself. My soul seemed to have suddenly left my body, and anger, fiercer than the devil, inflamed by gin, instantly seized my whole being. I snatched a penknife from my vest pocket, opened it, squeezed the unfortunate cat's neck, and cut out his eye without pity. I blush, I burn all over, I shudder, describing this monstrous villainy. The next morning, when my reason returned to me when I had overslept after a night of drinking, and the wine fumes had worn off the dirty deed that lay on my conscience, caused me remorse mixed with fear, but it was only a vague and ambivalent feeling that left no trace in my soul. I started drinking heavily again and soon drowned in wine the very memory of what I had done. Meanwhile, the cat's wound was slowly healing. True, the empty eye socket made a terrifying impression, but the pain apparently subsided. He was still pacing around the house, but, as expected, he fled in fear as soon as he saw me. My heart was not yet completely hardened, and at first I bitterly regretted that the creature who had once been so attached to me now did not hide his hatred. But soon this feeling gave way to bitterness. And then, as if to complete my final destruction, the spirit of contradiction awoke in me. Philosophers ignore it. But I am convinced to the depths of my soul that the spirit of contradiction belongs to the eternal motivating principles in the human heart, to the irreducible primordial abilities or feelings that determine the very nature of man. Who has not happened 100 times to commit a bad or senseless act for no reason, just because it cannot be done? And are we not, contrary to common sense, constantly tempted to break the law just because it is forbidden? So, the spirit of contradiction awakened in me to complete my final destruction. This incomprehensible tendency of the soul to self-torture, to violence against its own nature, the tendency to do evil for the sake of evil, and prompted me to bring to an end the torment of a dumb creature. One morning I coolly threw a noose around the cat's neck and hung him on a bitch, hung him, although tears were streaming from my eyes, and my heart was bursting with remorse, hung him, because I knew how he once loved me, because he felt how unfair I was doing to him, hung him, because that I knew what sin I was committing, a mortal sin. Condemning my immortal soul to such a terrible curse that it would have been cast down if it were possible into such depths where even the mercy of the all-merciful and all-merciful Lord does not extend. The night after the commission of this atrocity, I was woken up by a shout. Fire! The curtains at my bed were burning. The whole house was in flames. My wife, the servant, and I were almost burned alive. I was completely ruined. The fire consumed all my possessions, and since then despair has become my lot. I have enough firmness in order not to try to find cause and effect, to associate misfortune with my ruthless act. I only want to trace in detail the whole chain of events, and I do not intend to neglect a single, even doubtful link. The day after the fire, I visited the ashes. All but one of the walls collapsed. Only a rather thin internal partition in the middle of the house survived, to which the headboard of my bed adjoined. Here the plaster was quite resistant to fire. I explained this by the fact that the wall was plastered quite recently. A large crowd had gathered near her, many eyes were gazing intently and greedily at one place. The words, strange, amazing, and all sorts of exclamations in the same way aroused my curiosity. I came closer and saw on the white surface something like a bas relief depicting a huge cat. The accuracy of the image truly seemed incomprehensible. There was a rope around the cat's neck. At first, this ghost, I simply can't call it anything else, threw me into horror and bewilderment. But after thinking about it, I calmed down somewhat. I remembered that I had hung the cat in the garden near the house. During the commotion caused by the fire, the garden was flooded with a crowd. Someone cut the rope and threw the cat through the open window to my room. Perhaps this was the way he wanted to wake me up. When the walls collapsed, the ruins pressed the victim of my cruelty to a freshly plastered partition, and from the heat of the flame and the acrid vapors, the drawing I saw was imprinted on it. Although I calmed down, if not my conscience, then at least my mind, by quickly explaining the amazing phenomenon that I have just described, it still left a deep mark on me. For many months the ghost of the cat haunted me relentlessly, and then a vague feeling returned to my soul, outwardly, but only outwardly, similar to remorse. I even began to regret the loss, and looked for a similar cat of the same breed in dirty dens, from which I almost never got out now, which would replace my former pet for me. One night, when I was sitting, tormented by semi-oblivion, in some god-abominable place, my attention was suddenly attracted by something black on one of the huge barrels of jeep or of which almost the entire furniture of the establishment consisted. For several minutes I kept my eyes on the barrel, wondering how I had not noticed such a strange thing until now. I went over and touched her with my hand. It was a black cat, very large to match Pluto and similar to him as 2 drops of water, with only one difference. There was not a single white hair in Pluto's skin, and this cat turned out to have a dirty white spot almost all over his chest. When I touched him, he jumped up with a loud purr and rubbed against my hand, apparently very pleased with my attention. But I was just looking for such a cat. I immediately wanted to buy it, but the owner of the establishment refused the money. He did not know where this cat came from. He had never seen it hurt. I stroked the cat all the time, and when I got ready to go home, he clearly wanted to go with me. I did not hinder him. On the way I sometimes bent down and stroked him. At home, he quickly got used to it and immediately became my wife's favorite. But I myself soon began to feel a growing dislike for him. I did not expect this in any way, however I do not know how or why it happened. His obvious love caused me only disgust and annoyance. Little by little, these feelings turned into bitter hatred. I avoided the cat in every possible way. Only vague shame and the memory of my previous crime kept me from killing him. Weeks passed, and I never hit him or touched him at all. But slowly, very slowly, an inexplicable disgust seized me, and I silently fled from the disgusting creatures, from the plague. I hated this cat all the more because, as it turned out on the very first morning, he had lost, like Pluto, one eye. However, this made it even dearer to my wife, because, as I have already said, she retained in her soul that softness that was once characteristic of me, and served for me as an inexhaustible source of the simplest and purest pleasures. But it seemed that the more my malevolence increased, the stronger the cat became attached to me. He followed me around with a tenacity that is hard to describe. As soon as I sat down, he would crawl under my chair or jump on my lap, pestering me with his disgusting caresses. When I got up, intending to leave, he got in my way, so that I almost fell, or, digging sharp claws into my clothes, climbed up to my chest. At such moments I had an unbearable desire to kill him on the spot, but I was held back to some extent by the consciousness of my former guilt, and most importantly I won't hide it, by fear of this creature. In fact, it was not a fear of any particular misfortune, but I find it difficult to define this feeling in another word. I am ashamed to admit even now, behind bars, I am ashamed to admit that the monstrous horror that the cat instilled in me was aggravated by the most unthinkable obsession. My wife repeatedly pointed out to me the whitish spot I have already mentioned, the only thing that outwardly distinguished this strange creature from my victim. The reader probably remembers that the spot was quite large, but at first it was very vague, but slowly, barely perceptibly, so that my mind rebelled against such an obvious absurdity. For a long time it finally acquired inexorably clear outlines. I cannot name without trepidation what it represented from now on. Because of this, mainly, I felt disgust and fear, and would have got rid of the damned monster, if I had only dared. From now on, let it be known to you, it showed something vile, something sinister, the gallows. This is a bloody and formidable instrument of horror and villainy, suffering and destruction. Now I was truly the most miserable of mortals. A despicable creature like the one I killed without batting an eye. This despicable creature caused me, a man created in the image and likeness of the Almighty, so much unbearable suffering. Alas! Day and night I have never known a more blessed peace. During the day, the cat did not leave me for a moment, but at night, every hour I woke up from painful dreams and felt the hot breath of this creature on my face, and its unbearable heaviness, a nightmare in the flesh that I could not shake off, piled on my heart for the rest of my days. These sufferings drove out the last remnants of good feelings from my soul. I now cherished only evil thoughts, the blackest and most evil thoughts that can come into my head. My usual gloom turned into hatred for all things and for the entire human race, and my uncomplaining and long-suffering wife suffered most of all from sudden, frequent and indomitable outbursts of rage, to which I blindly indulged. One day, for some economic need, she and I went down to the basement of an old house in which poverty forced us to live. The cat followed me up the steep stairs. I stumbled, barely broke my neck, and went mad with rage. I grabbed the axe and, forgetting in anger the contemptible fear that had stopped me until then, I was ready to strike the cat such a blow that I would have cut him down on the spot. But my wife held my hand. In a rage that pales before the fury of the devil himself, I broke free and split her head with an axe. She fell without a groan. Having committed this monstrous murder, I began to look for a way to hide the corpse with complete composure. I understood that, but I could take it out of the house during the day or even under the cover of night, without the risk that the neighbors would see it. A lot of ideas came to my mind. At first I wanted to cut the body into small pieces and burn it in the oven. Then I decided to bury it in the basement. Then it occurred to me that it would be better, perhaps, to throw it into the well in the yard, or to hammer it into a box, hire a porter, and have it taken out of the house. Finally, I chose, as it seemed to me, the best way. I decided to imure the corpse in the wall, as medieval monks once immured their victims. The basement was perfect for such a purpose. The masonry of the walls was flimsy. Besides, not so long ago they were hastily plastered, and because of the dampness, the plaster still has not dried out. Moreover, one wall had a ledge in which a kind of fireplace or hearth was arranged for decoration, later bricked up and also plastered. I had no doubt that I would easily be able to take out the bricks, put the corpse there and seal up the hole again, so that the most experienced eye would not detect anything suspicious. I didn't make a mistake in my calculations. Taking a crowbar, I easily turned out the bricks, put the corpse upright, leaning it against the inner wall, and easily put the bricks in place. With every precaution, I extracted lime, sand and tow, prepared a plaster completely indistinguishable from the previous one, and diligently covered up the new masonry. When I was done with this, I made sure that everything was in perfect order. It was as if no one had touched bones. I cleaned up every last crumb of trash on the floor. Then he looked around triumphantly and said to himself, This time, at least, my labors were not in vain. After that, I began to search for the creature that was the cause of so many misfortunes. Now I am finally determined to kill it. If I had caught a cat at that time, his fate would have been solved, but the cunning beast, frightened, as it seems, by my recent rage, disappeared as if it has sunk into the water. It is impossible to describe or even imagine how deep and blissful a feeling of relief filled my chest as soon as the hated cat disappeared. He did not show himself all night. It was the first night since he had appeared in the house when I slept soundly and peacefully. Yes, I did, although the burden of crime lay on my soul. The second day passed, then the third, and my tormentor was still not there. I was breathing freely again. The monster fled from home in fear forever. I will no longer see him. What bliss! I did not even think of repenting of what I had done. There was a short inquiry, but it was not difficult for me to justify myself. They even did a search, but, of course, they didn't find anything. I had no doubt that from now on I would be happy. On the fourth day after the murder, the police suddenly came to me and again made a thorough search of the house. However, I was sure that the cash could not be found, and I felt very calm. The police told me to be present during the search. They searched every nook and cranny. Finally they went down to the basement for the third or fourth time. I didn't even raise an eyebrow. My heart was beating so steadily, as if I was sleeping the sleep of the righteous. I walked all over the basement. I crossed my arms over my chest and walked slowly back and forth. The police did their job and were about to leave. My heart was rejoicing, and I could not restrain myself. To complete the celebration, I was eager to say at least a word and finally convince them of my innocence. "Gentlemen," I said at last, when they were already climbing the stairs, "I am happy that I have dispelled your suspicions. I wish you all good health and a little more courtesy. By the way, gentlemen, this is a very good building." In a frantic desire to speak at ease, I barely realized my words. I would even say that the building is simply excellent. "In the masonry of these walls are you in a hurry, gentlemen? There is not a single crack." And then, reveling in my reckless audacity, I began to beat with a swing with a cane, which I held in my hand, on the very bricks where the corpse of my faithful was immured. "Lord God, save and protect me from the claws of Satan." The echoes of these blows had hardly ceased when a voice from the grave answered me. The cry, at first muffled and intermittent, like a child's crying, quickly turned into an incessant, loud, prolonged scream, wild and inhuman, into an animal howl, into a heart-rending wailing that expressed horror mixed with triumph, and could only come from hell, where all those doomed to eternal torment are crying, and the devils are viciously rejoicing. Needless to say, what crazy thoughts got into my head. Almost fainting, I staggered back to the opposite wall. For a moment the policeman stood motionless on the stairs, shackled by horror and surprise. But immediately a dozen strong hands began to crack the wall. She immediately collapsed. The corpse of my wife, already touched by decay and stained with dried blood, opened to the eye. On her head, with her red mouth agape and her one eye glittering, sat the vile creature that had insidiously pushed me to murder, and now betrayed me with her howl, and condemned me to death by the hand of the executioner. I have immured this monster in a stone grave.